On a stormy night, a young woman screamed for help on a quiet mountain road. And the man who heard her was a mechanic, a loner with a past full of losses. This is not just a rescue story. It's a tale of resistance against fear, learning what love is not, and redefining true strength. The rain was pouring down onto the broken mountain road like a knife. The sharp, relentless drops made the asphalt invisible in an instant. The storm had nearly silenced everything around. There were no bird calls, no sound of the wind. Only the engine of a single truck slowly moving uphill could be heard. Its headlights cut through the water curtain, forcing its way to light the path. Behind the wheel was Daniel Morgan. In his early 40s, with calloused hands and eyes showing both exhaustion and resilience, he was a mechanic. He was also a single father. One hand on the wheel, the other checking his vibrating phone. Another missed call from his son's school. "Damn it," he muttered, gritting his teeth. What happened this time, Josh? He barely had enough gas to get home, and now he had to deal with another problem? But before his frustration could rise any further, he slammed on the brakes. In front of him, a silver Mercedes caught his eye at the side of the road. The car was tilted strangely. Smoke was rising from its hood, and one of the front tires was completely shredded. As lightning cracked through the sky, he noticed the silhouette inside. Someone was desperately tapping on the window. A young girl was stuck inside. Without a second thought, Daniel parked the truck, threw his coat over his head, and rushed out. The rain soaked him immediately, but he didn't stop. He ran to the car and knocked sharply on the driver's side window. When the window rolled halfway down, he met the frightened gaze of the young woman inside. She looked to be in her early 20s. Her mascara had run down her face. Her hair was sticking to her forehead, and her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wide with panic, and she pointed to the passenger seat. "The door won't open. I think I hit something. I don't know what to do, please," she said. Daniel sprang into action, running to the other side of the car, forcing the stubborn door open with all his strength and pulling the young woman out. The ground had turned to mud from the rain, and she lost her balance in her heels, but Daniel caught her just in time. She was trembling all over, from the cold and the shock of what had just happened. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not in the mood to introduce myself," she said first, then whispered, Lena Grant." Daniel wrapped his coat around her shoulders, looking at her protectively. "Okay, Lena, you're safe now." "I'm Daniel," he said. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Lena blinked, as if she could barely understand what he had said. "Where am I? Where is this?" Daniel replied. "You're lucky. I was just coming back from a job. My place is a few miles away." He opened the truck door. "Let's go there. You're freezing. Let's get you warmed up first, then we can think about the rest." Lena hesitated. It was natural to be wary about getting into a vehicle with a stranger, but the torrential rain falling from the sky made the decision for her. She nodded and got in. Daniel's home was a small cabin hidden behind some pine trees. From the outside, it was the kind of place that didn't draw attention, a place most people driving by wouldn't even notice. When they walked inside, they were greeted by the smell of sawdust and motor oil. But it was warm, dry, and safe. The only sound was the soft ticking of an old clock in the hallway, and for a moment, the storm outside seemed to be miles away, leaving peace in its wake. When Daniel entered the house, Lena was still shivering. Her wet hair had fallen to the side. Her face was pale, but there was deep gratitude in her eyes. He handed her an old but clean blanket, then turned on the small electric kettle in the corner of the kitchen and started brewing tea. His shirt was still soaking wet. Without hesitation, he took it off and threw it into the washing machine. The fatigue he'd been carrying all day suddenly felt heavy on his back, but his humanity rose above the exhaustion. At that moment, the soft sound of footsteps came from the hallway. Little Josh appeared with sleepy eyes. His nightgown was too big for him. The sleeves covered his hands. But what he was holding was striking, a small, unfinished robot he had made himself. He looked like he had just woken up, but when he saw the unfamiliar face, his eyes grew wide with curiosity. "Dad," he whispered. "Who is this?" Daniel slowly turned his head and smiled. "She's our guest, Josh. Be nice, okay?" Josh stepped forward a few cautious steps. With a careful but sincere tone, he said, "Hello, I'm Josh. You're really wet." Lena forced a small smile. After all the fear and chaos, the child's simple and innocent manner warmed her heart. Yeah, she said, her voice weak, but her smile genuine. A little bit. Daniel prepared the tea and returned. He handed her a cup. Drink this, it'll help. Warm you up a bit. Lena took the cup with both hands and brought it to her lips. She inhaled the steam, closing her eyes before taking the first sip. Thank you, she whispered. Really, you stopped. You helped. Most people would just drive past me in their cars. Daniel shrugged his shoulders slightly. I'm not like most people, he said, sitting down on the chair and taking a sip of his tea. Lena looked around. This small cabin was old, but it felt cozy. Framed old photos on the walls, tools neatly arranged on shelves, sofas covered in pillows that had lost their color from use. There was wear and tear everywhere, but also a sense of effort, a feeling of loyalty. It was clear that this place was about substance, not show. Here, she said quietly, there's no luxury, but there's honesty. There's effort. Daniel didn't respond, but looked at her eyes. In them, there was a tired understanding from the past, a shared silent pain. Lena spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. My phone died, and I was actually running away from somewhere. Daniel nodded. He didn't ask questions, didn't interrogate her. Keeping eye contact, he said, You don't have to tell me. You're safe tonight. That's enough. Tears started to well up in Lena's eyes. She hadn't felt peace like this in a long time. You don't even know me. Why did you help? She asked in a hoarse voice. Daniel set his tea down and placed his hands on his knees. He lowered his gaze, but his words came from deep in his heart. Because, he said, I too was once in need of help. And the people who helped me back then didn't ask who I was. They didn't ask about my past or why I fell. They just reached out. Those kinds of people are rare, but they're the ones who keep you alive. The air in the room grew heavy for a moment. But this heaviness didn't come from fear. It came from a deep understanding. Two strangers, silently aware that they were walking the same path. The night went on. Josh had already gone to bed. Lena, wrapped tightly in the blanket, had fallen asleep on the couch. Her face looked more peaceful as she slept. Her eyelids closed not with the storm, but perhaps for the first time, with a sense of security. Daniel stepped out onto the porch. He had thrown on an old coat. With a half-smoked cigarette in his hand, he stared into the dark forest. The rain hadn't stopped, but it had lessened in intensity. Now, there was only a soft wind rustling from deep within the woods. He didn't know what was happening in that forest. He didn't know who Lena really was, what she was running from, or what had brought her to this point. Another thing he didn't know was that, on the other side of the city, a private security team had been looking for her for hours. Lena Grant wasn't just a stranger in this small cabin. She was also the only daughter of Victor Grant, the richest and most ruthless construction tycoon in the country. Her father, who hadn't contacted her in 6 months, had finally decided to call again, that very night. Almost like a strange coincidence. But Daniel knew nothing of this. And by morning, everything would change. His quiet, simple life would never be the same again. The silence of the morning was shattered by a sudden roar. Just 30 steps away from Daniel's cabin, a black helicopter cut through the sky, rapidly descending. The sharp sound of its blades sliced through the mountain air, creating a storm-like gust that rushed toward the cabin. The ground lifted, dry pine needles and dust flew in all directions. Even the trees seemed to bend to the power of it. The black body of the helicopter hung in the air, looking like it didn't belong. A threatening metallic creature, out of place in the natural rhythm of the forest. Inside, Daniel, holding his morning coffee to his lips, froze. The cup remained suspended in his hand. Beside him, Josh, who had rushed to the window as soon as he woke up, looked out with frightened eyes. Dad, he said, his voice shaky. Are we in trouble? Daniel immediately ran to the door. At that moment, footsteps came from the hallway. Lena, with messy hair and sleepy eyes, stumbled down the corridor. The blanket was still draped over her shoulder. When her eyes caught sight of the helicopter through the window, the expression that suddenly crossed her face said it all. What's going on? Daniel shouted, trying to overpower the noise of the wind. But Lena's panicked face had already revealed the truth. Outside, the helicopter doors had already opened. 2 men in black suits stepped onto the ground, carefully scanning the surroundings. Their body language was disciplined, military-like. Their movements were trained, their gazes predatory. Miss Grant, the older man said with a deep voice. Your father sent us. We've found you." Lena took a step back. Her eyes widened. Her lips trembled. "No," she whispered. I'm not going with you." Daniel stepped in front of her, blocking the men's way. "Hey, someone explain to me what's going on here. This is my house. You don't give orders here," he said, his voice growing harsh. The man adjusted his earpiece. "Sir," he said in a formal tone, "please step aside. This is a private matter concerning Miss Lena Grant. She is the daughter of Victor Grant." Josh's mouth dropped open. "The Grant? The billionaire?" Daniel slowly turned to Lena. His eyes were questioning, his voice tinged with disappointment. "You didn't think to mention this?" Lena couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling. "I didn't want to be found," she said in a hoarse voice. "I ran away, because I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted to get away." Daniel stayed between her and the men. "If she doesn't want to leave, she's not going anywhere. It's that simple. She's safe here, and the decision is hers." The young bodyguard stepped forward. "Sir, please don't interfere. This is an official matter dash," but Daniel didn't budge. He didn't take a step back. At that moment, a third figure descended from the helicopter. He was older, taller, and had a stronger aura. His gray suit looked more expensive than everything in Daniel's truck. With sharp features, a cold gaze, and an unwavering posture, he stepped onto the forest floor as if the air around him had emptied. It was Victor Grant, Lena's father, and when he arrived, the forest fell silent. Lena stepped back, her eyes growing wide with fear. "Dad," Victor's voice sliced through the cool morning air. "You've had your rebellion, Lena. Now get in the helicopter, and let's finish this." Lena shook her head. "No." Victor's jaw tightened. His anger was now evident in his eyes. "You've already disgraced yourself enough for this family. Running off into the woods, disappearing, and now in this shack. With someone." He turned his eyes to Daniel, sizing him up with a contemptuous look. "With this man." Daniel didn't move. He just stood tall. "Watch your words," he said in a low but threatening tone. "This shack is where I kept your daughter alive through that storm." Victor ignored his words. "You're coming home, Lena. The matter is closed." Lena glanced at Josh for a moment, then at Daniel, then at the blanket she still held in her hands, the one Daniel had given her. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, it wasn't anger. It was a resistance that came from a broken heart. "I'm not going," she said slowly. "You didn't call me for days. Because you didn't care. You only remembered me when your investors started asking. You don't care about me. You just want to protect your image." Victor's eyes narrowed. His voice was ice cold now. "If you don't come with us voluntarily, you'll regret it." Daniel stepped in front of Lena once more. He had become a wall between her and the men, his eyes locked on Victor. "She's not an object," he said, his voice calm but as firm as stone. "If she wants to stay, she stays here." Victor took another step closer. His voice dropped lower, but the threat in it was much more intense. "Do you really think you can stand against me?" Daniel replied without blinking. "I don't care who you are. You can't walk into a man's home and start giving orders. You want to talk? Then talk like a man. But you can't drag her away by force. This isn't your throne, and I'm not your servant." Victor's face twisted from surprise to anger. No one had ever spoken to him like this. This mechanic, who didn't kneel before his wealth, his name, or his power, that was exactly what made him dangerous to Victor. But the real shock was reflected in Lena's eyes. She was looking at Daniel as if, for the first time, someone had stepped forward for her, as if the single protective gesture she had longed for all her life had finally materialized before her. A few tense seconds passed. The air grew heavy, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Victor pressed a button on his earpiece. "Step aside," he said in a cold, calculated tone. "We'll be back tomorrow." He turned to Lena one last time, his voice like a knife. "Think carefully, Lena, because next time I won't ask." Then, he turned and walked toward the helicopter, kicking up mud as he went. As the blades started spinning again, the wind howled around them, but Daniel didn't move. Lena didn't run. When the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the forest, a heavy silence fell over the house. The storm was over, but it felt like a new one had begun inside them. Lena collapsed into the chair. She noticed her hands were still trembling. She took a deep breath, but the peace didn't fill her lungs. "I'm sorry," she said in a hushed voice. Daniel stood in front of her. "For what?" he asked. "For bringing this here. For lying. For not being myself. Daniel slowly shook his head. You didn't lie, Lena. You just didn't tell everything. Those aren't the same thing. At that moment, Josh silently sat beside them. Curiosity was written all over his face. Are you really the daughter of a billionaire? He asked. Lena couldn't answer at first. She looked at the cracked edge of the cup in her hand. Then she looked up. Sometimes, being rich feels like being in a cage. And I couldn't breathe anymore. Everything was about power, control, looking perfect. There was nothing real. I wanted to run. Josh tilted his head. And you chose this place? Lena let out a small laugh, her voice tinged with pain. No, it wasn't planned. But I'm glad I'm here. As night fell, Josh went to his room. Daniel and Lena sat on the porch again. The stars had returned, and the sky was clear. The silence was no longer threatening. It was peaceful. After taking a sip of his coffee, Daniel turned to Lena. I meant what I said this morning. You owe him, your father, nothing. Not unless you truly feel like you do. Lena lowered her head. I don't know what to do. If I stay, he'll hurt me. If I leave, I'll completely disappear. Daniel looked up at the sky, then turned to her. Maybe it's time, Lena. Not just to stand up to him, but to stand up to everyone who's tried to shape you. Lena's voice cracked. Do you really think I can do that? Daniel looked into her eyes. I've seen a lot in my life. I know what people hide, what they carry. But there's something in you. There's a fire inside you, Lena. Don't waste that fire trying to be like everyone else. Use it for yourself, to build your own life. Lena didn't say anything for a long time. Then, very slowly, she nodded. You don't even know me, she said, almost in a whisper. Daniel smiled. No, but I know broken things. And I know when they start to heal. But they both knew. Healing wouldn't be silent. Victor Grant had never been humiliated like this before. And the next morning, as he had promised, he would return, but this time, not with words alone. When the next day dawned, the sky was strikingly clear. There were no clouds, birds were singing, and the forest was waking up. But this peace wasn't real. Daniel felt it deep in his bones. As he worked in the garden, a sense of unease accompanied every move he made. Josh was tinkering with a small drone he had made from scrap parts, while Lena sat on the porch. Her phone was in her hand, her eyes glued to the screen. Her inbox was full. Missed calls, voicemails, all from Victor. She saw them all, but didn't open a single one. Finally, she murmured, maybe I should go. What if he does something before I leave? Lena's voice trembled. The fear gnawing at her had now shown clearly on her face. Her eyes were fixed on the window, but her mind was in a much darker place. Daniel, meanwhile, was crouched under the truck, next to a rusty axle. He didn't lift his head. His voice came, sharp but calm. That's exactly what he wants. To make you scared, to corner you, to get you in a position where he can control you. You don't know him, Lena said, her voice breaking. Daniel tightened a bolt, the sound of the wrench hitting the metal echoing in the air. No, I don't know him, but I know bullying. They all act the same. The moment someone stops fearing them, they panic. That's when their masks fall. Lena was silent, but his words were sinking deep into her. Yet that afternoon, fear returned as a physical reality. This time not with the hum of an engine, but with the silent threat of a black BMW. The car came to an obvious stop on the dirt road. Victor hadn't come this time. Instead, he had sent someone else. A young, confident man dressed in an expensive suit. His teeth were white, his smile fake. Even his shoes seemed to look down on the dirt. The man stepped out of the car, walked toward Daniel, and handed him a white envelope. This is a formal notice. Signed by Judge K. Fax. From now on, you are not to contact Miss Grant in any way. Failure to comply will result in criminal penalties, fines, imprisonment, or both. Daniel took the letter and read it, his face showing not the slightest sign of emotion. The words on the paper seemed to penetrate his heart more than his eyes, but he didn't let it show. Does he really think this is how he'll get her back? He asked, his voice as cold as ice. The lawyer chuckled lightly, tilting his head. There's no intention of getting her back, he said. But control, that's another matter. Right now, that girl is stuck here. But remember, she's his daughter, not yours, not your responsibility. Lena stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, chin tilted up. Her eyes were burning with fire. If my father thinks he's going to scare me, he'll have to try harder. The lawyer's smile widened. I'll make sure he hears that, he said, then turned and walked back to the BMW. The car's tires dug into the dirt, and only Lena's breath and the growing hum of the storm remained. That night, Lena didn't eat. She rejected every offer Daniel made. She simply stood in front of the window, chewing on her nails. Her shoulders were tense, her gaze wandering into nothingness. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. "No," Lena replied honestly. "It won't stop. He won't stop until he wins." Daniel sat next to her, his eyes determined. "Then don't let him win." Lena turned her head. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there was also anger. "It's easy for you to say. You don't know him. He has power, money, connections. He can get people fired, kick them out of their homes, even make them disappear." Daniel replied without blinking. "He might be rich, Lena, but that doesn't mean he's right. He may have money, but he doesn't own you, and you're not property." Lena's hands trembled. "He'll destroy you too. You and Josh, just to prove his power." Daniel leaned forward. His voice dropped low, but his resistance grew stronger. Let him try. But the next morning, the blow came. It hit Daniel's workshop, the one he had poured his heart and soul into over the years. That small, run-down, but everything-to-him workshop. A city official appeared at the door. He had papers in his hand and a sad look on his face. He stood helplessly in front of the chain-link fence. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan. Someone has filed a formal complaint. Code violations, license issues. Your workshop is closed until further notice." Daniel's insides froze. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "I wish I were." The man said, his voice full of regret. "Orders from above. You'll need to vacate the building within a week." Daniel simply lowered his head. He clenched his fists. In that moment, all his anger, fear, and helplessness hit him at once. 6 years of hard work, destroyed by an envelope. Daniel drove down the road without saying a word, leaning against the wheel. He tried to swallow the anger that was knotted in his throat, but the fire inside him grew with every mile. He couldn't accept the closure of his workshop, the sealing of 6 years of hard work with a piece of paper. But he knew this wasn't just about work. This was his freedom, his honor, the only legacy he could leave to his son. When he reached home, he slammed the truck to a stop. As he slammed the door shut in anger, Lena had already stepped onto the porch. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. Before he could say anything, Lena whispered, "I'm sorry." Daniel took a deep breath, not breaking eye contact. "This is how your father fights, isn't it?" he said with a bitter smile. "Taking the last thing I have." Lena's shoulders slumped. "I'll leave," she whispered. "I promise. I'll fix this. It's just." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Leaving won't fix anything, Lena. That's what he wants. For you to run away, for you to be scared. He'll win again. He'll have scared someone else into running." Lena's voice faltered. "But you don't deserve this. Because of me. No one deserves this." Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp. "But life doesn't give you what you deserve. You have to fight for what you want. And I'm tired of being afraid of men like him. I'm not going to bow to someone just because they have money and connections." That night, after Josh had gone to bed, Daniel pulled an old box from the back of his wardrobe. Dusty, forgotten, heavy with the weight of the past. Inside were court documents from years ago, alimony papers, records from custody battles, even old photos of a house. They all sat on the pages like scars. "I lost everything once," Daniel said, his voice slow but filled with deep pain. "My home, my tools, even the time I spent with Josh. I got it all back with my own hands. No favors, no gifts. With my blood, sweat, and tears. Now, I won't accept losing it all again." Lena swallowed hard. "So what do we do now?" Daniel turned his eyes to her. This time, not only determination but defiance was shining in his gaze. "We'll show him what real power is. Not the kind that can be bought, but the kind that's earned with blood and sweat." Lena couldn't breathe for a moment. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" Daniel was silent for a while, then answered quietly. "Because someone has to break the cycle. And maybe it starts with you." That week, Daniel wrote a letter. Not to a judge or a lawyer. Directly to the public. To the media. He wrote about how a billionaire had used his power to forcefully try to take his own daughter back. How a mechanic's garage had been shut down with no warning. And how silence had become a weapon. He sent the letter to 5 news channels, 3 bloggers, and 1 popular podcast host. He didn't think anyone would care. It was just a possibility. But 3 days later, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. A national talk show made it the main story. Then, a big YouTuber picked up the story. Suddenly, a hashtag began trending online. Hashtag Let Lena Live. People were raising their voices against injustice. Reporters started appearing on the dirt road. Microphones were thrust toward the porch. And the man who had always been ignored his whole life was now at the center of the country's attention. This time, Victor Grant couldn't silence anyone. Because this time, he wasn't facing just one man. He was facing a whole public. One morning, Lena stood next to Daniel. They were sitting together on the porch. On the cameraman's screen, her father's face appeared, stern, tense, on the defensive. Lena's voice faltered, the words catching in her throat. I never thought anyone would believe me, let alone someone would fight for me. I never imagined it. Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled but his face calm. You're not just a pawn anymore, Lena. Don't forget that. And from now on, no one can define your life for you. Lena, you're the one who knocked over the pieces in this game. Daniel's voice blended into the night. But the game's not over yet. Because billionaires don't lose. Or they don't lose quietly. And Victor Grant still had a card to play. The media frenzy had turned Daniel's quiet mountain cabin into something like a circus. Reporters were sleeping in their cars lined up on the dirt road. Drones buzzed in the sky, recording every moment. Strangers, having traveled for hours, were leaving small notes at the fence people who didn't even know Lena, but were grateful to her. The story was no longer just about Lena. It had become a symbol of resistance against a ruthless system where control, power, and love were transformed into ownership. And Daniel chose courtesy, not fear. That's why people believed in him. They clung to him. But Daniel knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Victor Grant wouldn't give up. He knew how to use the quiet moments of the war. That night, after the last reporter had gotten into their car and left the dusty road, Lena and Daniel sat together on the porch. Josh had already fallen asleep. The stars were flickering in the sky, and the cold air thickened the silence. Even heartbeats could be heard. Lena broke the silence. I don't know what comes after. What if he really destroys everything? What if he ruins you? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned his eyes to the dark forest. Then he exhaled heavily. Maybe he can take everything, but he can't take who I am. Lena lowered her head. I always thought love was control, because that's what I was taught. Rules, obedience, power. I always thought if someone didn't follow those, they didn't love you. But you showed me something else. Daniel lowered his voice. Sometimes, without trying to fix someone, just sitting next to them silently is the most powerful thing you can do. Knowing they're broken and accepting them as they are. Lena looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears and her voice trembled. You were there. And for the first time, Lena slowly rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything. But that silence, it was like the scream of years. The next morning, Victor Grant made the final move in the game. He filed an official lawsuit in federal court. He claimed that Daniel had been harboring his daughter, manipulating her, and that Lena was mentally vulnerable, threatening her safety. It was a dark, calculated, and dirty move. But it worked. Suddenly, the atmosphere on social media changed. Whispers of doubt rose. Maybe this mechanic isn't such a good guy after all. Is he trying to get famous? He looks innocent. But what if his real intentions are different? Daniel felt it immediately. The wave of love turned into a cold retreat. His bank account was frozen. Questions, comments, insinuations piled on him one after the other. And Lena, she was furious. He's trying to isolate us, she shouted. He's flipping the story. Everything. Daniel shook his head. That's what he wants. You disappear, I break, and he walks away clean. What if you lose everything? If we give up now, we both lose. But that night, Lena was gone. When Daniel woke up the next morning, he found a note on the kitchen counter. It was handwritten. I love you both, but this is my fight now. Don't look for me. Victor Grant could never have predicted what would happen the next morning. Lena stepped into the Grant Global Enterprises skyscraper. She wasn't wearing makeup. There were no expensive clothes. She was just herself. Clean, simple, but determined. Her eyes shone as if they were on fire in the dark. She passed through security and walked straight to the boardroom. The company's top executives were sitting around the large glass table. The meeting was in progress. The door opened. A silence fell over the room. No one knew what was happening. Then Victor's eyes met hers. You have no business here, Victor said. with a tone between shock and anger. But Lena's steps didn't stop. Her posture carried the weight of years, and she had no intention of kneeling. "Lena, you're the one who knocked over the pieces in this game." Daniel's voice mixed with the night. "But the game's not over yet, because billionaires don't lose. Or they don't lose quietly." And Victor Grant still had a card to play. The media frenzy had turned Daniel's quiet mountain cabin into a circus. Reporters were spending the night in their cars lined up on the dirt road, drones buzzing in the sky, recording every moment. Strangers, having traveled for hours, were leaving small notes at the fence people who didn't even know Lena, but were grateful to her. The story was no longer just about Lena. It had become a symbol of resistance against a ruthless system where control, power, and love were transformed into ownership. And Daniel chose courtesy, not fear. That's why people believed in him. They held on to him. But Daniel knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Victor Grant wouldn't give up. He knew how to use the silent moments of the war. That night, after the last reporter had gotten into their car and left the dusty road, Lena and Daniel sat together on the porch. Josh had already fallen asleep. The stars flickered in the sky, and the cold air thickened the silence. Even heartbeats could be heard. Lena broke the silence. "I don't know what comes after. What if he really destroys everything? What if he ruins you?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned his eyes to the dark forest. Then he exhaled heavily. "Maybe he can take everything, but he can't take who I am." Lena lowered her head. "I always thought love was control, because that's what I was taught. Rules, obedience, power. I always thought if someone didn't follow those, they didn't love you. But you showed me something else." Daniel lowered his voice. "Sometimes, without trying to fix someone, just sitting next to them silently is the most powerful thing you can do. Knowing they're broken and accepting them as they are." Lena looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears and her voice trembled. "You were there." And for the first time, Lena slowly rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything. But that silence, it was like the scream of years. The next morning, Victor Grant made the final move in the game. He filed an official lawsuit in federal court. He claimed that Daniel had been harboring his daughter, manipulating her, and that Lena was mentally vulnerable, threatening her safety. It was a dark, calculated, and dirty move. But it worked. Suddenly, the atmosphere on social media changed. Whispers of doubt rose. Maybe this mechanic isn't such a good guy after all. Is he trying to get famous? He looks innocent. But what if his real intentions are different? Daniel felt it immediately. The wave of love turned into a cold retreat. His bank account was frozen. Questions, comments, insinuations piled on him one after the other. And Lena, she was furious. "He's trying to isolate us," she shouted. "He's flipping the story. Everything." Daniel shook his head. "That's what he wants. You disappear, I break, and he walks away clean. What if you lose everything? If we give up now, we both lose." But that night, Lena was gone. When Daniel woke up the next morning, he found a note on the kitchen counter. It was handwritten. "I love you both, but this is my fight now. Don't look for me." Victor Grant could never have predicted what would happen the next morning. Lena stepped into the Grant Global Enterprises skyscraper. She wasn't wearing makeup. There were no expensive clothes. She was just herself, clean, simple, but determined. Her eyes shone as if they were on fire in the dark. She passed through security and walked straight to the boardroom. The company's top executives were sitting around the large glass table. The meeting was in progress. The door opened. A silence fell over the room. No one knew what was happening. Then Victor's eyes met hers. "You have no business here," Victor said, with a tone between shock and anger. But Lena's steps didn't stop. Her posture carried the weight of years, and she had no intention of kneeling. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video. You can subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with new content. Also, by clicking the join button, you can support this channel and help me share even more meaningful stories. Your support ensures that these stories reach more people. Thank you.